And welcome to another edition of the X-Zone. I am Rob McConnell, and for the next 4 hours, I am your host. I am your guide as together we cross the time-space continuum to this place that I call the X-Zone. It's a place where people dare to believe and dare to be heard. It's a place where fact is fiction and fiction is reality. And the X-Zone comes to you Monday through Friday from 10 p.m. Eastern until 2 a.m. Eastern, right here on the X-Zone Broadcast Network, Talkstar Radio Network, Mutual Broadcast Network, and on Simul TV. If you'd like to send me an email, same email for the past 30 years, xzone at xzoneradiotv.com, on all social media sites, X-Zone Radio TV. Now, to find out about the programming we have available for you, 7/24/365, on the X-Zone Broadcast Network, visit www.xzbn.net. And for the X-Zone TV channel programming on Simul TV, visit simultv.com. And in the search engine, simply put, X-Zone. X-Zone Nation, my guest this hour is Corey Washington, and I had the pleasure of having Corey on a few years ago. Now, Corey is originally from New York City. He is an educator, author, and music historian currently in Augusta, Georgia. He holds both a bachelor's and master's degree in the education from Augusta State University. He has written 2 books on Jimi Hendrix, Nobody Cages Me and Jimi Hendrix Black Legacy. And he has also represented the Hendrix estate at 2 induction ceremonies. Joining me now is Corey Washington. And Corey, welcome back to the X-Zone.
Thanks a lot, Rob. Glad to be back.
Hey, Corey, what drew you to write 2 books about Jimi Hendrix?
Well, it was kind of interesting because growing up, I didn't really know much about Hendrix at all. Mm-hmm. It was actually a wrestling show that hit me to Hendrix full time, which was Hulk Hogan.
Oh my gosh!
Come to the ring, yeah, Hulk Hogan.
Yeah,
come to the ring with a Jimi Hendrix song, and once I heard that, my interest was piqued, and it was like from that point on, I just kept doing more and more research on Jimi Hendrix.
Jimi Hendrix, one of the all-time best guitarists ever. Man, that guy could get a guitar to sing on its own without any vocal backups.
Right, definitely. It's amazing what he was able to do, whether it was a right-handed guitar, a left-handed guitar, because if it was right-handed, he'd just flip it upside down and play it. He didn't care.
Man, I often wondered, how in the name of heaven does he do it? He was just fantastic. Well, let me ask you, Corey, what drew you to write 2 books on Hendrix?
Well, the first one I wrote was in 2010.
Mm-hmm.
It was called Nobody Cages Me. And it was kind of like an introductory book. It was mainly based on a research paper I did when I was in college, because I was always interested in how was it that this guy who was an African-American was so great at what he did. Why wasn't he more well-known in the African-American community? So I wanted to know the ins and outs of that. And so based on my research, I was propelled to write a book on that, Nobody Cages Me, which was taken from one of his quotes where he felt that he couldn't be boxed into any kind of genre or category. And so that was the first book. And that book actually opened up so many doors for me to meet so many people that knew him. And I just compiled all of this research that I wanted to do an even more comprehensive book, which was Jimi Hendrix Black Legacy, where I interviewed quite a number of people and just dug deeper into his legacy in the black community and put forth this notion that Jimi Hendrix, you may not think that he was big in the black community, but his influence was so pervasive that it touched the black community in many aspects.
What separates Jimi from all other guitarists?
I would say one of the things that separates him, other than his natural God-given ability, was the fact that he was able to branch out into so many genres. I think that he was a musician that was courageous and adventurous, and it was almost like his tentacles just reached into so many different places, where these other guitarists, they might reach a few places, but Jimi was all over the place.
Jimi passed away, I believe it was September 18, 1970. And yet here we are still talking about him 50 years after his death. Why?
It's probably one of the reasons, I would think, is not only is he a great guitarist, like you said, but in the 70s, early 80s, the interest started to wane a little bit for some people. And it was, I believe, Alan Douglas was over his music in the 70s and so forth, and had some controversial albums that he put out where he used different musicians and so forth. But it was a resurgence in the late 90s when his estate was turned over to his father and stepsister, Jimi Hendrix. And it was like this whole wave of publicity and new releases. It just started to take the world by storm. So all of these people like me that didn't get to experience Jimmy in the 60s and 70s, I did experience him anew. And so it's just like it's been recycled. So now it's like, it's from that point on, it's continuing. And I mean, they just had a couple of new releases out recently with the Groovy Songs for Groovy Children with the band of Gypsies.
Well, I'll tell you something. Great songs never die.
Right.
You know, and certainly Jimi Hendrix has a great number of them. But in your opinion, Corey, why hasn't Jimi Hendrix not been fully accepted in the black community?
I would say some of it was marketing. He wasn't really marketed to the black community when he was alive. You know, things like Soul Train hadn't really been fully formulated. He didn't have like the R&B acts backing him up when he became famous. A lot of people might have felt like his music wasn't dance floor worthy in the black community. They could have been, a lot of black people in the community could have been conservative, and they could have been freaked out by his psychedelic appearance, or, you know, oh man, it's the drug thing. You know, it was all sorts of reasons that I found out that he may not have been accepted. But, you know, once you start digging away, you'll find that a lot of black people in the black community really did dig Jimi Hendrix, and it just kind of the layers need to be pushed back a little bit.
You know, when it comes to music as well as everything else in life, in my humble opinion, Corey, whether you're black American, whether you're white American, whether you're green Canadian or whatever, you're still a human. And I think that people like Jimi Hendrix and Smokey Robinson and the other greats, including Michael Jackson, tried to break that barrier with their music and show people that no matter who you are, we're all together.
Right, definitely. And it's interesting you bring up Michael Jackson, who definitely smashed barriers. Another person I bring out in my book is Prince.
Another great artist.
Right. He started off maybe in the disco funk type realm, and then he branched off into some rock, and he had, just like Jimi Hendrix, he had so many genres, but he was finally able to break through in the 80s with Michael Jackson with the Purple Rain soundtrack. And, you know, I feel like if Jimmy would have lived longer, you know, he could have had something similar to a Thriller or a Purple Rain, or maybe collaborated with some of these artists and branched out somewhat.
You know, I believe, Corey, that we all are put here for a reason, and that when our objective has been completed, we're given time to either stick around or hop back on the soul train, so to speak, and come around for the next tour of duty at what we're supposed to do. So I after listening to Jimi Hendrix over the years and admiring his musical talent and the way he played guitar, man, I'll tell you something. He has touched more hearts and inspired more guitarists than I think we'll ever know. So, Corey, please stand by. You and I have to take our first break. And Exonation, if you'd like to find out more about my guest this hour, Corey Washington, visit his site at www.jimibl.com. This is the X Zone, a place where people dare to believe and dare to be heard. It's a place where fact is fiction and fiction is reality. We're coming to you from our broadcast center and studios in Niagara, Ontario, Canada. Here's something that we just did today. Starting this weekend, you'll be able to pick up your iPhone or your home Nest for Amazon Alexa and say, "Hey Alexa, play the X Zone radio show." There you go. Another feather thanks to the people here at Relmar. Corey Washington and I return on the other side of this break. Whatever you do, don't go away. And welcome back. Jimi Hendrix, Voodoo Child, one of his many great hits. Now that's what I call guitar playing. One of the greats. My guest this hour is Corey Washington, and Corey's website is jimibl.com. First of all, thanks for being on the show, and congratulations on your 2 books, Corey.
Oh, thanks a lot. Definitely, thanks.
Hey, Corey, what are you doing as an author, a speaker, and all the work that you do, as well as a music historian, to help educate people about Jimi Hendrix?
Well, as far as the presence on social media, as you can probably imagine, there's so many discussions that pop up where a lot of misinformation is always spread. And at any point in time that I could enlighten people based on my research from the facts, I do that, as well as just going to a lot of young kids are interested in Jimi Hendrix. As a teacher, as a school teacher, I'm able to enlighten and educate them as well. You mentioned how Jimi Hendrix, his music never dies out. You know, I've just recently, as a couple days ago, there were kids in a classroom just talking about Jimi Hendrix. Wow. His name pops up quite often.
Jimi Hendrix's death was rather, controversial, Corey. Was he murdered?
Personally, I think that he was murdered. I think what probably got me was knowing that the how much wine they said was on the premises of his death, and when they told me what his blood alcohol content level was, it sounded kind of fishy because it didn't match up with how much wine they said that he regurgitated and forth, choking on his own vomit, and that's just the forensics of it. But if you just cut through the forensics and just look at the circumstances surrounding all the shady and fishy people that all of a sudden started dropping dead after Jimmy died, his manager, who was a prime suspect, Mike Jeffrey, dying in a mysterious plane crash. They never really found the body. Monica Danneman, many years later, the last person to see him alive, she supposedly committed suicide, another fishy situation. Devin Wilson, one of his main girlfriends, supposedly fell off a roof or somewhere in New York at a hotel, and some say she was pushed. There's just all of these weird, everything that you can think of with the JFK situation, you can think of with the Jimi Hendrix murder.
I was just thinking that as you said it. There is a lot of similarities. So why do you think that Jimi Hendrix would have been murdered? Like, he wasn't one of the guys that was involved with the mob. He didn't have a lot of enemies that we knew of. So in your opinion, why do you think, if he was murdered, he was murdered?
Well, you have a couple of trains of thought here. I guess I can first start with the manager, Mike Jeffrey.
Okay.
You mentioned he didn't have any mob ties, but his manager actually did. I think it was Club Salvation in New York. It was a mob club. Jimmy had to play that club a few times and came in the counter with mob types. Jimmy was actually kidnapped and supposedly mysteriously rescued by his manager and his cronies. You know, shady things like that. You're in Canada, you know, the Toronto incident where all of a sudden these drugs are planted on him.
Yeah.
All of these things were done to control him, you know, so that was one thing. But his manager actually had a policy on him, and Jimmy was about to sever ties with his manager, Mike Jeffrey, and his manager was stealing a lot of his money and putting it in offshore accounts. And so when the hands changed from one manager to the other, they were going to have to open up the books, and they would probably discover so many different shenanigans going on financially that this guy, Mike Jeffrey, would have definitely been in trouble. And so what's the quick way to get out of that is dispense of Jimi Hendrix, you know. That's one train of thought.
Okay.
But then you can go into the other train of thought, which goes into the U.S. government, the CIA, and all of these other people, you know, wanting to silence Jimi Hendrix with the COINTELPRO. There was the rise of the Black Messiah. Jimi Hendrix was bringing a lot of people together, white people, black people, all persuasion. The Star Spangled Banner that he did, a lot of people within the government didn't like that. I mean, all of these things add up to, you know, what we think of Jimi Hendrix as a great talent, but he made some people at the very top levels of government look at him a certain way. So let's just put it like that.
Wow. Tell us about the push to induct Jimi Hendrix and the Band of Gypsies into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame.
Well, this first started, I think Jimi Hendrix was set to be inducted as a solo artist in the R&B Hall of Fame in Detroit. I think this happened in 2016. And I contacted the director, which was Lamont Robinson, and wanted to be a part of this. And so I was able to speak with the estate, Jimi Hendrix, and they were supposed to be there to pick up the award or accept on his behalf, but due to a scheduling conflict, I was able to fill in for them. And one of the things that I was trying to push for was for not just Jimmy to be inducted into the R&B Hall of Fame, but also the Band of Gypsies, because that group was just such a great group and had such an impact on music. And so what happened was they didn't get inducted that year in 2016, but 3 years later, the Band of Gypsies did get inducted into the R&B Hall of Fame in 2019 in Detroit. And that was a great experience. And so the push is for, since Jimmy is already inducted as a solo artist in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, for the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame to recognize Jimi Hendrix, Buddy Miles, and Billy Cox as the Band of Gypsies in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. Because Buddy Miles is not in and Billy Cox is not in, because if they would have waited a couple years later, he could have been inducted with the Jimi Hendrix Experience.
As a historian, music historian, what are the major changes that you are noticing in the music industry these days, Corey?
I would say the biggest, well, not the biggest, but one of the things that jump out at me is probably the streaming aspect. If you listen closely, you're starting to see a lot of these newer artists. You're starting to hear them talk about they've broken the Beatles record or Elvis record or this other legend's record. And when you investigate it, they didn't really sell the same amount of records, physical records that they sold. They're getting credit for streams. And if you think about it, you know, there's just so much shady stuff that goes on with these streams that it's really hard to keep a hold of, like, are they actually, you know, reaching that many people?
It's very hard. The analytics can be manipulated in many, many ways. Right,
because if anybody that uses any of the streaming, like Spotify or whatever, You could be listening to one of your favorite artists, and all of a sudden they push another artist in there on you that you don't want to listen to at all.
Yeah.
And, if you've already got so many skips, and you either have to listen to this artist or you have to cut it off. And so just imagine how many people they're doing that to all over the world, the millions and billions of people all over the world. So it's almost like they're forcing these other artists to get these credits for these songs. So that's one of the things that's very alarming, to me anyway.
When you look back in time, my friend, and we look at Hendrix, we look at Smokey Robinson, we look at the Beatles, we look at the Rolling Stones. These guys worked their butts off to get where they were today. They just didn't sit behind a desk using computer digitization with synthesizers and upload their music to the different platforms in order to be a success. Strange times, my friend, and you and I have to take our news break at the bottom of the hour, Corey. Please stand by. And X Zone Nation, my guest this hour is Corey Washington. His website is jimibl.com. And Corey and I will be back on the other side of this commercial break with the news as we continue here in the X Zone from our broadcast center and studios in Niagara, Ontario, Canada. Now, the new edition of the X Chronicles newspaper will be released this week, probably Thursday afternoon. Some of the great articles include exposing the Mitchell Hedges crystal skull for the hoax it was, as well as the Mandela effect. Why are people getting sucked into the belief that people and things are just crossing from one universe to the other, and that things are being changed right in front of their eyes? Two of the great topics that we're discussing this edition of the X Chronicles newspaper, and you can read it online with our compliments at xchroniclesnewspaper.com. Corey and I return. Don't go away. That's what I call music. Many memories listening to Hendrix in Montreal at the different pubs that I used to frequent. Let's just leave it at that. Our guest this hour, Corey Washington. His website is jimibl.com. That's jimibl.com. First of all, Corey, great having you back with us. Congratulations on all that you do. But you're an author. You're an educator, you're a music historian, and you're also an independent publisher. And I have to ask you, Corey, in today's world of digital publishing and the depletion of the brick and mortar stores, what's it like to be an independent publisher?
I would say the hardest part about being an independent publisher would be the marketing aspect, because, that can become quite pricey.
Yeah.
And if it's not quite pricey, it can become quite time-consuming for you to do it all on your own. And that's probably has been the hardest part, because there's just so many people out there to reach. Your target audience, and once you start to do your social media thing, and once you've used up that scope, how do you go beyond that? You probably have to spend some dollars to reach people that's not in your immediate circle.
And contrary to public belief, publishers do not make a lot of money on their product.
Right, because you have to factor in the books as far as royalties. If you're getting a royalty for your book, you're going to be getting paid less money as far as, per book. But if you, publish or go out and get a bunch, put it up, you can get a better margin on it that way. But once again, it's more of a cost factor. You're becoming more of an entrepreneur because you're taking that risk and getting these books printed up. So people have to realize that.
That's right. And, people say, well, I've got my book on Amazon. And I say, yeah, so? Well, I'm going to make a lot of money. Why do you think that? Well, because it's on Amazon. And who are you telling about your book being on Amazon? Well, I don't have to because it's on Amazon. It's like, no, people really have to bust their butts. And my hat goes off to you from one publisher to another for the pain and the sorrow that I'm sure you've gone through trying to get your product out there, because an independent publisher believes in their product. 9 times out of 10, an independent publisher is an independent author. So you've got to wear 2 hats. And let me ask you, where can our listeners get your latest copy, Jimi Hendrix Black Legacy, A Dream Deferred?
They can either go to my website, as you mentioned, jimibl.com, or they can go on Amazon, which is Amazon in the United States as well as Canada. They can get them from both places. You can get it actually anywhere in the world on Amazon. It's all over, as well as Barnes & Noble. If you have a local Barnes & Noble, you can go in there and request them to send it to the Barnes & Noble in your local area. They'll send it there. I've even seen it on Walmart. You can go on Walmart's website and request for it to be at Walmart. So it's really all over these platforms that are probably some places I probably might not even know of is probably on there.
Corey, 30 years ago when I published the first edition of the X-Chronicles newspaper, and it was distributed, and my wife and I were grocery shopping in St. Catharines at the time, and I just, we went up the aisle to where the newspapers were and the magazines, because that's where I usually bought the magazines that I would read. And lo and behold, Corey, there was our publication, the X-Chronicles, Volume 1, Number 1. I was thrilled. I had to yell at my wife, who was down the aisle, to come and see this, and she comes thinking that something was wrong with me, and I said, look, our newspaper. And all the
that's a thrilling feeling,
And she said, well, that's good. And I put it in the shopping cart. She said, what are you taking in the shopping cart for? We've got about 2,000 of them at home. I said, yes, but I can buy this one. She just didn't get it.
I have a similar situation in Augusta. I'm from Augusta, Georgia. James Brown and the Masters golf tournament.
Yep.
And we have a Barnes & Noble over here at the Augusta Mall.
Mm-hmm.
And it's still a surreal feeling just to walk in there. A place that I've walked in so many other times before and seen every other author's book and so forth, to just go in the music section and see Jimi Hendrix Black Legacy sitting on the shelf in paperback and hard, copy. And, you can tell all your friends, you go to the mall and you can go to Barnes & Noble and get my book, but it's just a surreal feeling to just looking in. You almost, like you say, want to buy it yourself just to take it out of there.
Exactly. And in fact, somewhere in my files, I have that original receipt from the shopping, from the grocery store where we bought the newspaper. But you must admit, Corey, that coming up with the concept for a book, doing the research, writing the book, surpassing the writer's block that we all get, doing the editing, cross-referencing it again, once again, proofreading it, getting the artwork done, getting the ISBN number or ISSN number, getting it out there where you are able to see it on the bookshelf. Man, I don't think people will ever understand who haven't done that. What a feeling of accomplishment it is.
Right. The hours, like you said, that you've taken going over it with a font. See, it's one thing to be a semi, self-published author where you go to like Ex Libris or any of these other companies and they do most of the stuff and your name is just on there. But for this last book, I truly was an independent publisher because I did everything from the editing, from the the design of the cover to, like you said, the ISBN, everything I had to do pretty much, except for maybe formatting the inside. I outsourced that, let somebody else do that.
Right.
But, this is such a tedious process to get it right and to get something, not just putting, because you've probably seen it yourself, people do their own thing and then they put a book out there that looks like it's put out by them. I didn't want to do that. Even though I did everything, I wanted people to think that this was done by a company, not me, myself.
It was done by a hardworking, independent author by the name of Corey Washington.
Definitely appreciate that.
Oh, sir, you earned it. What other projects are you working now on, Corey?
Right now, I'm gearing up for March 25th, 2020, which is an important date for the Band of Gypsies. That's the 50th anniversary of when their landmark live album came out, the 4 concerts at the Fillmore East. I'm trying to gear up a push for our Facebook page. We have Induct the Band of Gypsies into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. I'm trying to put together a special video for that occasion. So if your listeners can go make sure they check out our Facebook page, Induct the Band of Gypsies into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. We got a lot of interesting content on there.
Well, listen, Corey, I'd like to make an offer to you, my friend. If you can get me that video, I will play it on the X-Zone TV channel.
I can do that.
And I'll tell you why. Just in Los Angeles alone, we have the ability of going into more than 5.8 million homes. That's just in LA. And we're around the world. So if you could get me a copy of that file in an MP4 format, I would be honored to help you push that cause of getting the Gypsy Band inducted.
All right, I'll definitely do that. Now we got to put a little more spunk into it now just to make sure it's right.
Hey, coming from you, I'm sure it will. All right, so you've got that project. You must be very busy at school these days. And let me see. What other history are you checking into as a music historian?
Let's see. As far as the musical history, I also cover anything as far as hip-hop. A lot of people don't connect Jimi Hendrix with hip-hop, but in my book, I'll outline that. The jazz aspect with Miles Davis and how Jimmy was at the early forefront of the jazz fusion movement. Of course, R&B, people are starting to know more and more about his early R&B background days. So I try to incorporate all of these different genres and look at it from a historical standpoint, and that the lines all draw back to Jimi Hendrix. So that I think that's what makes my book very unique as far as any other Jimi Hendrix book out there on the market, is I give close detail to not just, just one point here. Jimi Hendrix had pop success on the pop charts, but he also had success on the R&B album charts, and a lot of people don't know that.
Well, let's talk
that new information.
Let's talk more about that when we come back from this commercial break as we wrap up this hour here in the X-Zone from our broadcast center and studios in Niagara, Ontario, Canada. My guest is Corey Washington. His website is jimibl.com.
I heard you shot your woman down, you shot her down now. Hey, Joe.
Welcome back. Corey Washington is my special guest this hour. X-Zone Nation, www.jimibl.com. First of all, Corey, thank you so much for joining us. It's a great pleasure talking to you again. And congratulations on your newest book, Jimi Hendrix Black Legacy, A Dream Deferred.
Thank you. Thank you.
What do your students think about having a teacher who who is the number one authority when it comes to Jimi Hendrix.
I tell you what, sometimes I don't even tell the kids that I write a book, but they always find out anyway, and that kind of gives you a measuring stick of, their interest. And these kids, they sniff out things, and sometimes you don't even have to toot your own horn, and they'll come up to you, hey, did you write a book on Jimi Hendrix? So I tell you what, they impress me with that sometimes.
Having taught for so many years and being an educator, how has the influence of handheld devices affected the student-teacher relationship?
I think that maybe when it first started, maybe there was some promise that this could be a way for students to become engaged. But I think as time has gone on and so much junk has been put on the phones, it's become more of a distraction. And I'm pretty sure if you see people walking around like zombies with their handheld device, just imagine what they're doing in the classroom if they are in a subject that they don't care too much for. They're going to be attached to their phone at all times.
I've had several conversations here on the show with different people about what I see happening because of the handheld devices, the smartphones and the Alexas and everything else like that, Corey. And the other day, Laura and I went out for supper. It was Valentine's Day, so we went to the local restaurant. And I was amazed to still see people, using their iPhones, using their smartphones, instead of communicating with the people that are sitting there at the table. What happens, Corey, if there's a power failure or an EMF, electromagnetic problem that just kind of kills the electrical grid, the wireless grid, the cell towers? How are these kids and these people going to be able to exist without their little handheld devices?
I guess unless somebody's gone through that, they probably would be asking themselves the same question, because, if it's just like a person that probably smokes a cigarette or does drugs, they get withdrawal symptoms. They probably start looking around and trying to have something electronic in their hand. But one time it was the TV, maybe video games. But as I see it now, the handheld devices have taken precedence over all of those things.
Yeah, it's scary because up here in Canada, they've even stopped teaching children how to write. Come on.
Man.
Kids say, well, all I have to do is speak into my iPhone, and it's called talk to text, old man. Yeah, I know that. But I also know that if the power goes out, I'll be able to write a letter.
Yeah. I think spell checks kind of pampered us. I used to be a pretty good speller, but with that spell check, I see myself missing words that I would never miss in the past.
So when we look at the state of the educational field, when it comes to the fact that kids are using, or they're being allowed to use their smartphones and their other handheld devices, in your opinion, is it working? Are the kids getting smarter, or are they losing some of the essential communication skills?
For the vast majority of them, they're losing skills.
Yes,
for maybe a few of them that were probably going to be smart anyway, they could use their phones. Like as adults, when we don't know something, sometimes we look it up. We look on our phones, we look it up on a computer, use Google, but it just doesn't stop there. You also have to have a critical mind to make sure that you're looking at something that's of some validity and not just taking the first thing that you see on the internet. And so if these kids can develop, that sense, I can see where it can help them, but they're just kind of just following fads, trends, and things like that, and it's kind of leading them down a path a dark path, I would say.
Hey, Corey, remember the old days when we went to something called a library that had those funny things called books, that you could actually go in and read? And we were talking earlier about self-publishing books, and I'll tell you something. Some of the self-published books that I have seen that have been sent to us by people who want to be guests on the show, man alive, the grammar, punctuation, spelling is atrocious.
Yeah, I mean, here locally, I'm part of a literary festival, and
Right.
we get, all sorts of people sending books in, and I see the same thing.
So where do you think the publishing industry is going to be going, let's say 10 years from now, Corey? What's your gut feeling telling you?
Well, at one time, I would think that things were going to go more digital and so forth, but some of the recent facts and figures that I've seen, they're trying to say that the books that you hold in your hand are making a comeback. So
Yeah.
I think that it's going to be kind of interesting. I'm kind of torn, I also have my ebooks as well as books you can hold in your hand, but I think the books you can hold in your hand have been more popular than the ebooks, for some reason.
Yeah, I agree with you. In fact, I guess it was, let me see, I guess it was around 2003, we stopped printing the X Chronicles just to go with the digital versions. And we're going back to print because of the requests of the readers as well as the request of the distributors. And the cost of printing has gone down because they have finally decided and found the technology to use recycled newsprint. So what the heck, eh?
Oh, okay.
Supply and demand.
Yeah, as well.
2 books. Is there going to be a 3rd book?
If so, I would have to probably start getting my more. There's more people that I definitely want to interview, but if I can think of a direction to take this thing in and nobody's taking it in, I'll definitely do a 3rd book. But as far as it is right now, I'm more of an activist and trying to get things done on that end. Using my book as a platform, trying to get things done.
In all the research that you did for your 2 books on Jimi Hendrix, what was the most amazing or startling fact that you found out about Jimi that you didn't, that no one else was able to discover?
Well, it was a revelation that Jimi Hendrix was actually doing quite well on the R&B album charts.
Yeah.
We all know his prowess on the pop charts, but he actually had like 5 top 10 albums on the R&B, charts. Are You Experience, Axis Bold as Love, Electric Ladyland, The Cry of Love, and
My Lord,
Rainbow Bridge. Yeah, all of those were top 10 R&B albums. And he had 2 albums that were on the R&B album charts for like a whole year, which was The Band of Gypsies and Are You Experience. So no, I didn't see this information anywhere, and I actually went on Wikipedia and updated all the things on Wikipedia because of that.
what words of inspiration do you have for any young person listening to us tonight who is contemplating a career in music? What advice do you have for them?
Well, I would definitely tell them that if you can't be original, your career is probably going to be short-lived, but whatever you do, just don't, risk your integrity for a quick buck, because, those type of people, if you talk to the people that have done that, they're very unhappy, so definitely don't do that.
And as an independent publisher and author, what advice would you have for someone who's aspiring to be an author?
Definitely count the cost, know your target audience, and don't be afraid to, think outside the box, and make sure you put out something that people want to read. That's number one.
Yeah. Corey, one more time, let our listeners know where they can get copies of your books.
My website, JimiBL.com, JIMIBL.com, Amazon all over the world, Barnes & Noble, as well as Walmart.
Corey Washington, it's been a great pleasure talking to you again, my friend. Continued success. I look forward to getting that MP4, and I will blast it all over our channel. So thank you for all you do, and I look forward to the next time you and I meet back here in the X Zone.
All right. Thanks for all your help, Rob.
Hey, you take care, buddy, and my best to
All
your
right.
family as well.
All right, thank you. Yours too.
Good night, sir.
Good
Exo
night.
Nation, my guest has been Corey Washington this hour. Once again, Corey's website is jimibl.com. Well, that's it for this hour. I'll be back on the other side of this commercial break with the news as we continue here in the X Zone from our broadcast center and studios in Niagara, Ontario, Canada. If you'd like to send me an email, xzone at xzoneradiotv.com, on all social media sites, X Zone Radio TV. For all the programming information on the X Zone Broadcast Network and the shows that we have there, the times that were played, visit www.xzbn.net. And for the X Zone TV channel on Simul TV, www.simultv.com, and in the search engine, type in X Zone. I'll be back on the other side of this news break at 6.5 minutes past the top of the hour, so don't go away.